Hello all. I realize that I have not done a review of what's probably Philip K. Dick's most famous book, if it's not my favorite of his, and that is The Man in the High Castle. Um, to give you an idea, alternate history was not a separate subgenre of science fiction in 1956 when this book was written. There was one previous alternate history book, which is Bring the Jubilee by Ward Moore, which was about a South in which the Confederate States won the Battle of Gettysburg and forced the surrender of the United States and took over. And it takes place then in the 20th century when everything has sort of fallen apart. And this version of history has been, they're threatened by the German Union, who is their other enemy. And a scientist decides to go back in time and prevent the South from winning the Battle of Gettysburg and reverse history, which I think is interesting in and of itself. It was way before Guns of the South by Harry Turtledove. Again, it was 1953. But The Man in the High Castle is interesting in it's the first alternate history of World War II. And it posits a World War II where Germany and Japan won the Second World War. The United States was split into four different zones: the Pacific Zone, which is controlled by the Japanese; the Northern Zone, which is controlled by the Nazis; the South, which is also controlled by the Nazis; and the Rocky Mountain States, which is an independent buffer zone between the two major superpowers. And it tells a story it has several different characters. Frink is a guy who makes kind of cheap costume jewelry, and he's also a hidden Jew who's hiding out in Colorado because they're not really prosecuted in the buffer zone states. His wife, Juliana, has left him for a truck driver named Giuseppe, or she calls him Joe, who turns out later to be a Nazi agent. And his boss, Robert Sheldon, produces these fake Wild West artifacts because the Japanese are fascinated with the myth of the Wild West, and sells them to the Japanese as real artifacts. And he has people, who are so good at producing these things that they appear to be real, even though they'll even pass inspections. But eventually he discovers the name of the company and the people who work for the company that are making these things, and threatens to blackmail them unless they back his jewelry enterprise, which they do. One day, a high minister of the Japanese, I think it's Mr. Takoshi, comes into his store and sees one of his items of jewelry and claims that it has wu, which in Japanese is spiritual integrity. And now that he's declared that these items have wu, Frank's work starts becoming in demand, even with the Nazis. And that puts him in danger because, of course, if the Nazis find out he's a Jew, he's going to be exterminated like everybody else. And in this version of history, they went ahead with the death camps and put to death all of Europe's and Africa's and every place else's Jews, and Romani and homosexuals and anybody else they didn't like, Slavic people. And there are a couple of different plots. One is that Hitler had died in about 1948 of tertiary syphilis, you say. And then his secretary, Martin Bormann, took over. Well, now Martin Bormann has died, and there's a power struggle between Hermann Goering, who declares himself Fuhrer, and Reinhard Heydrich, who thinks the head of the SD, who, this is the secret police, who decides that he wants to be the Fuhrer. And there's kind of a lot of infighting going on. Meanwhile, this Japanese minister has learned that there's a plot against to overthrow the Japanese home islands, and he's trying to convey this to his superiors who don't really believe him. There's a number of odd things that happen. I'm not going to go into complete detail. I do not have a reading copy of this book any longer. I know there's a lot of stuff about the I Ching in kind of the center of the book, which gets a little bit burdensome. The interesting point is about a fictional book within the book, which is called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, allegedly written by a guy named Franklin Robinson, and it purports to report a history where the Allies won World War II and Germany and Japan lost. And that book is somewhat sought after. It's banned in the Nazi parts of the United States, but not in the Japanese part because they don't believe it's real. And through a number of coincidences, Frank and his ex-wife Juliana get back together. This guy Joe, who she'd been sleeping with, turns out to be a Swedish Nazi agent, and they kill him. And then they are on the run from the Nazis, and they discover Avinson, and they're talking to him about this book, The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. And he claims it's just based on the I Ching, that it's not based on any real event, and that people are exaggerating, that he never lived in a place called the High Castle, or that he's moved out of the High Castle. He's not guarded by the Nazis, don't care about him anymore. The book ends on sort of an ambiguous note. You don't really get to know anything else after that. That's kind of it. It just drops. Dick had planned to write a sequel, but he said that writing this book was just so heavy on him that he said, I can't imagine, writing from the viewpoint of Reinhard Heydrich, a sequel, so he didn't write it. There was, of course, the very well-received and well-produced 4-season series, The Man in the High Castle, which was overseeing. The creative consultant was Philip K. Dick's last wife, Tessa, and it was really good. It starred Rufus Sewell and Alexa Davalos and Chalal Horsdal and some other really good people, and it's really, really worthwhile. They expanded it very, very far beyond Dick's original concept. Now it's not a book, but a movie that Avinson had produced of the Allies winning World War II and the Normandy invasion succeeding, where in their world it failed. And then it goes on from there into some really wild directions. A lot of the story is the same, but a lot of it is improvised, and it really works well. I particularly liked Rufus Sewell's performance, and Chalal Horsdal, who plays his wife, who I think is really gorgeous and curvy, and a redhead. I like redheads, but that's beside the point. The book is good. It's worth reading, but I do not think, against popular opinion, that it is Dick's best work. It's certainly not as creative as works like The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, or Ubik, or The Unteleported Man, aka Lies Incorporated, or The Penultimate Truth, or The Zap Gun, or Now Wait the Last Year, or even some of his lesser works like, Clans of the Alphane Moon, or The Ganymede Takeover, which he wrote with Samuel Delany. I think all of those are actually better than even Galactic Pot Healer and Our Friends from Frolix 8 are better than this book. It's interesting, but it bogs down in the middle. It's really hard to read if you're not into the I Ching, because he just goes on and on and on and on about it to the point where it gets boring, quite frankly. I recommend it, but I do not think it is his greatest work, but you can judge that for yourself.